Shall we? Good. So, hello. Good evening. Good evening and welcome in the name of How Hebel am Ufer to tonight's special broadcast, live stream broadcast at your computers here live from the stage of How One. We will discuss today without a real public in the audience, except from your virtual public and some members of the team of How. We're here alone on stage. Yes, because we live in exceptional times, and in order to prevent the virus from spreading rapidly, and in alignment with the instructions of the Cultural Department of the Berlin State Government, and like any other big culture institution in Berlin, we will also be closing down all our events in all three houses until April 19th. However, we will broadcast some selected events through live stream for the festival Spy on Me, which starts next week on the 19th of March. And it was also very clear to us that we want to make this discussion possible by any means. So this is the live stream premiere. This is a theater through live stream premiere tonight. Yes, it was important to make this discussion possible because tonight's issue is an urgent one. We want to shed light tonight to violence against women in a transnational perspective, a hot topic that concerns humans' lives, that concerns human safety, and the fight against gender-based violence. Yes, we actually know the figures, gender-based violence, we mean pure bodily violence, we mean rape, we mean sexual harassment, we mean femicides, murder of women because of their gender, and we know that this is happening all the time. We know that every third woman in Germany has experienced bodily violence in her lifetime. We know that 60% have experienced sexual harassment. We know that 20% have experienced violence in a partnership. And although we know these figures for some time now, and although they are overwhelmingly high, and one could say that actually this shows that a big part of the population is endangered every day, the indignation about it is not yet sufficiently loud in public discourse, and there is also not enough legal measures against it. On the contrary, there is a relative impunity of the perpetrators that is covered in a strange veil of normality. Something about this violence seems to be perceived as normal or as natural. And today we gathered here in order to discuss this naturalization of violence, to put forward other facts, other narrative, to talk about legal and state measures, and finally to get through to the political dimension of this violence in order to make clear that there is nothing normal or natural about it. So I'm sitting here with people that are doing the work against violence against women for a long time in theory and practice. And I have to say that this discussion happens in occasion of Christina Clemm's new book. Christina Clemm sits here opposite of me. She's a lawyer of criminal and family law, and she just published a book where she documents the cases you were defending in court throughout your career. It's called AktenEinsicht, Geschichten von Frauen und Gewalt. In English, A Look into the Files, Stories of Women and Violence, published in Kunstmann Verlag. And some months ago, you came to me and you said, I want to do a book presentation, but I want to do much more than a book presentation. I want to do a big gathering on this urgent matter. And this is then when we invited Prasanna Gettu, criminologist and human rights activist from India, and finally LASTESIS, the performance and activist group from Valparaiso in Chile, to discuss along with her. I will introduce everyone further later on in the discussion, but I want to start with Christina. And before, I want to say also, we were planning, dear public, to also have the performance of LASTESIS, the theatrical version of their performance after our discussion, and we will still, after our discussions, show this performance also here on live stream. So yes, stay with us. We can start with Christina. Yes, Christina, we thought, since it is also, you dedicated your whole book presentation to this discussion, that it would make sense to look into your book and to have a taste of what these cases are like, and that we start with you reading out one of these examples. So now we will listen to Christina reading out one example of her book.
Sehr gerne, herzlichen Dank. Ich werde Teile einer Geschichte, der ersten Geschichte.
Thank you very much. I will be reading parts of the first story in the book. Claudia S. is the daughter of a senior teacher at university and a theologian. She grew up as an only child in bourgeois Berlin, has just graduated from high school, and is well on her way to begin her studies of psychology. She has a good relationship with her parents and many friends, most of whom she knows from school. There are and have been a few flirtations, but the right one hasn't been there yet, until she meets Kevin in her gym and falls madly in love with him. He helps her to change the weights on a machine and later invites her for a drink. She doesn't know why she's accepting that invitation. She'll think about it often later, probably because he's so different from everyone around her, perhaps because he has such an incredibly friendly smile, perhaps also because he's so strong. Kevin is very different from everyone she has been with friends so far. And he adores her. They laugh a lot on their first evening, and she knows that he will carry her on his hands. He has money that he spends with his hands full, mates who treat him with respect at parties in the hippest clubs in the city. Kevin showers Claudia with gifts. He takes her to the most expensive restaurants, to the best clubs, to parties on the big yachts in Lake Wannsee. He takes her to illegal boxing fights and introduces her to all his friends. Claudia is fascinated. She feels like in a film. She enjoys the new, wild, unconventional life. Here, it doesn't matter who has what degree, what doctorate, what book one has read. She enjoys the new society, also the lawlessness, her own rules, the new community, the Berlin she didn't even suspect existed. Kevin is someone in the drug business. He's working for the really big ones. The sale for half of East Berlin is his business. He's a well-structured organizer, sits at home at his computer for a long time and keeps lists which he always keeps in a safe. Claudia breaks off contact with her parents after they have clearly shown in their friendly and worried manner that what they think of Kevin. For her, they had long been too bourgeois, too well-behaved, too conformist with their educated bourgeois liberality. Claudia lives with Kevin, runs his household, orders fast food. Sometimes she cooks for him. She's now only sweetheart, sweetie pie, and horny princess. When he leaves, he wants her to stay at home, but when she goes out, he wants the driver not to move away from her. I'm just afraid about you, darling. The world is much worse than you imagine. 15 months of this. They talk about starting a family. A little princess, a sweet princess, or a little prince. When the pregnancy doesn't work out right away, Kevin enrolls her in a fertility clinic. They're still waiting for the sperm analysis, are already looking for a bigger apartment suitable for children. Everything is going well. But then Claudia meets Tobias on the street. She knows him since primary school. He lived on the same street. They learned to swim together and to read and write. When Tobias' family moved to another part of town, they lost sight of each other. It's the day of her 22nd birthday. Kevin has organized a big party for his sweetheart. The whole club above the roofs of Berlin is reserved just for her. All his friends, all their mutual acquaintances will be there. Claudia tells Tobias about the party and invites him spontaneously. Tobias comes. At the party, she talks to him for almost 2 hours about old times, about the primary school teacher with the mean voice, about the caretaker who always beat the children, about her and his parents, about harmless stuff. She's happy to see the old friend again, someone from her old world. As he leaves, the driver follows him. As soon as Tobias leaves, Kevin orders a magnum of champagne. He drinks alcohol. She's never seen him do that before. He's funny, kisses her in front of everyone. He cheers her on. They celebrate until the early hours. When they come home and Claudia just closes the door behind her, happy and a little drunk, Kevin hits her in the face with his fist without warning. She falls to the floor. He kicks her. Then he ties her up and whips her. After that, what follows is the description of a very severe violation. I'm not going to read this here. She screams, she cries, she pleads, she whimpers. Eventually, she gives up. He chokes her until she faints. When she wakes up, she's lying on her sofa. Kevin's gone. Everything hurts. Her whole body is bruised. She puts on her jogging suit, takes it off again. She washes herself, puts on the clothes again, takes off her clothes again, and washes herself again. With the vegetable brush, she scrubs her body bloody. When Kevin writes her that the driver is going to pick her up, she takes Cherie. Cherie is the dog that Kevin gave her some time ago, and she flees. She flees without a feeling, without thoughts, and she runs through Berlin. She doesn't know where to go. She doesn't report to the police because she doesn't feel that police will give her safety against Kevin and his friends. What follows is her escape and a certain degree of safety she finds herself in during several months. But one day, when she's already stopped looking around, it happens. Kevin stands in front of her in the middle of the supermarket. She will never know how he found her. Kevin smiles at her. He comes towards her, and then he threatens her. He hisses bad insults at her, and she screams as loud as she can. Kevin walks out slowly, very slowly, first smiling, then laughing, and he takes Cherie with him, who is on a leash outside. Claudia doesn't dare to leave the safe supermarket. She has to watch inactively as he takes her favorite pet. In the supermarket, someone called the police, and when they arrive, she reports him spontaneously months after the crime, first for stealing the dog. But the police officer, a woman, realizes there's more to the case than the stolen dog, and Claudia is unable to hide it, so she tells about the rape. What follows then is a description of the prosecution in the first instance, which ends up in the pronouncement of a prison sentence of 3 years, but then Kevin goes to the Court of Appeal. And Claudia will have to testify during 7 long days. And she's interrogated for 7 long days of trial at the appeals chamber. She answers all the questions, explains her relationship to her parents, to her former friends, to Kevin. She falters when she's asked whether her former boyfriend was a equal match to her. And immediately the defense lawyer follows up and he says, "Oh, Miss S., let me ask you this. Do you like to feel superior? Do you enjoy that?" They ask her to explain why she's changed so much from a bourgeois teacher's daughter to a chic scene chick in a fur jacket, and how quickly she changed back. When and how often she lied, the defense lawyer wants to know, in general, but also in particular. Did you skip school? Did you lie to your parents? Did you pit your friends against each other? What did you tell your parents at the beginning of your relationship with Kevin? Did you lie to them? Why did you get rid of all your old friends? Do relationships with other people mean nothing to you, Ms. S? Have you also abandoned other friends from one day to the next? And if not, please tell us the names and addresses of the friends you didn't abandon. At the end, the appeals chamber is convinced of the guilt of Kevin. After 8 months of negotiations and hardly a part of Claudia's life that wasn't screened. The decisive factor for the chamber after the verbal pronouncement of the judgment is that no one and no evidence was found that Claudia had engaged in sexual practices in which she was beaten and injured. And Kevin had also planned the crime because he had drunk against his habit after Tobias had left, as several witnesses had confirmed. This fits in well with the statements of Claudia, as does the assault and threat to Tobias. The reasons of the charge also speak for the credibility of Claudia, not for that of Kevin. But however, the court finds that Kevin's guilt is not quite as high as the first instance's verdict. It was particularly noteworthy that there had been a difficult history between the two in which the defendant had felt inferior due to his personality structure. The affair of the witness with the old childhood friend had to be assumed in favor of the defendant, even if Tobias and Claudia had denied this. At the very least, one had to assume in Kevin's favor that he might have believed it. His jealousy and anger that the aggrieved party had openly displayed this at the party he had organized and paid for was therefore understandable, even it could not fully justify the act. It was also particularly to be taken into account that the parties involved had had a relationship with one another, and that the act was therefore to be assessed differently, namely as less serious than rape by a foreign perpetrator. It also had to be seen that the aggrieved party had just felt attracted by the aggressive masculinity of the defendant, which ultimately became her undoing, and that she had to establish, even if one could not speak of complicity, that the deed was under a different sign than if she had sought another partner. Kevin is being sentenced because of a minor case of sexual coercion to a suspended sentence, and he walks out freely the day of the pronouncement of the judgment.
Before I ask you why this story, I want to just add that we are here, you might have noticed, in a similar UN situation. We will speak 3 languages on the panel, and you in the live stream are hearing the English simultaneous translation. So Christina spoke German, Prasanna will speak English, and LASTESIS Spanish. Yes, this was an impressive court decision, I think. Why did you choose this story as an intro for this panel?
Ich habe natürlich überlegt, welche Geschichte ich am besten vorlese und vielleicht das einmal zu schildern.
Well, I had to think for quite a while which story to pick, and this one here covers different topics, not only violence against women in the domestic area, but also in different types of conflicts. And I picked this story because I think it illustrates really well how trials are organized and the views that are represented in court, and that this could be an everyday case. It's a really good example, and that's why I chose it.
Prasanna Gettu, you're a criminologist and the founder of the International Foundation for Crime Prevention and Victim Care in India. And over the last 15 years, you have helped about 50,000 women affected by violence in your country. For your work, you got awarded the Anne-Klein Preisträgerin last week of the Heinrich Böll Stiftung. And yes, my question is, of course, now if you can relate to what Christina was just reading, if, yes, you think that this is also a situation that you can see in India. Maybe you can describe a bit the situation of violence against women in India, and also to bring in also this issue, the issue of legal measurements against it.
Yeah. It looked to me like they were different. When I was listening to the case, it was like, pieces of different cases that came to my mind. And a common thread, it looked like I've heard this many, many times from my clients. And, well, a very typical perpetrator, I think we can find them anywhere. And being very jealous, okay. Of course, the first thing when she said that, bringing her flowers or making her feel good, this happens. And I should tell you before that in India we have a class culture, okay? We have the lower socioeconomic, the middle and the upper. And this violence is something that cuts across. And probably this appears to me like one of the middle and the upper class cases, but the same can happen to the lower economic strata also. Okay, buying her flowers, making her feel good, taking her for movies, let it be a dating violence or a committed relationship or a married relationship, and everything suddenly changes. Okay, everything suddenly changes, and it feels jealous by a particular, by her talking to somebody on the phone, maybe a long-lost friend, or meet somebody on the road, just like the way you said it. And also before that, the isolation, very, very typical, okay? In marriages, you can see that the moment the marriage happens, the same night, she's asked almost to stop talking to her parents. Why do you talk to your mother so many times? She's feeding so many things into you. That is why the trouble is starting with us. So isolating her from the parents and from the siblings and best friends and so on. Very, very typical. And making her feel very good in terms of protecting her, okay? This is not just in intimate relationships. I see this in sexual harassment in workplace also. I was just being protective. I was just helping her cross the road and holding her hand, okay? And maybe she's from a different culture, a different state, so I was helping her buy clothes, okay? The bringing the protection part of it so much into, okay? Men are protective, men are trying to safeguard women, okay? That also was so much typical. And the fertility clinic part that she mentioned in that case, okay? Do women have rights over, what about the reproductive rights, okay? It brought me to, as soon as you get married, you need to have a child. If you do not have a child, that's where violence starts in the Indian family, most often, okay? It's 6 months, she's still not pregnant. It's 1 year, she's still not pregnant. The pressure that comes on the young girls to have a baby soon, okay? And of course now it's the stress on her, and she's also taken to, maybe she herself wants to go or taken to fertility clinics, okay? And physical violence, yes, I think it's something that we don't even have to talk about. It can be anything from, I see that every day, okay, right from hitting to being pushed off from the bike, having spinal injuries, to, keeping a hot, branding her with a hot cooking pan or a spoon or whatever, to anything that you can think of. Okay, there have been clients who come to me with pinch marks all over like a design on the body. Okay, and a client that comes to my mind where she had knife marks on her hand like a design. Okay, so that you will not forget. There's a line, And she was explaining every line to me, what it meant and when he had put that line on her. Okay, and taking away pets, many of the women hesitate to come to the shelter. We say, okay, we will allow pets to the shelter, but they somehow fear that, he's going to, if he takes away the pet, he's going to destroy. Okay, and I think our shelter has that option of bringing pets, and that is it's good for some of the clients who want to come away. Otherwise, there are many of them who don't want to leave their pets. Okay, and then a case that comes to my mind where she came away to us, leaving her dogs, and he would send small messages to her, okay, with pictures. Okay, he killed one dog after the other. She had 3 dogs. Okay, he would send small pictures to her. Okay, maybe the leg, the eyes, the ears, absolutely, and very common. Okay, of course, when she was talking about the rape part of it, assault part of it, is something that came to my mind, that legally marital rape is not recognized in India. So when the abuse is from the, when there's sexual abuse or when there's rape, there is no way that we can go to the court. Okay, no way that we can go to. I have no idea about countries like Germany, but we have there is no way that we can get justice there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. Maybe you want to say about the
Deutschland auch erst seit 1996.
Since 1996, marital rape can be prosecuted in Germany.
It is also illegal in Germany. Maybe we continue with LASTESIS, and I will introduce you guys one after the other. So first we have Sibila Sotomayor, then we have Daphne Valdez, then we have Paula Cometa and Lea
Cáceres.
You were the initiators and creators of a performance called A Rapist, in Your Path. This performance that went viral and was performed, appropriated, embodied by the whole world last November, meaning that, yes, what we have heard in a way starts to be publicly performed, and that you created something that became a kind of protest movement in the way of bodily movement. So we all can align to it. And you also did it in a special context. You did it in the Chilean context, in the middle of also social unrest there. And so my question first to you would be, if you could also describe the case of violence against women in the Chilean context.
Sí, hola. Como decía Margarita,
Ja, wie Margarita bereits, as Margarita told us already, there were, of course, investigations in Chile as well, but that is very common in our country because there are many sexual attacks committed by the police forces, and this has really triggered us to create this work and to connect it to this context and to adapt it to the public sphere as an intervention, as a form of public protest, first of all in the city of Valparaiso, in order to denounce, first of all, the public police in Chile for committing these acts of sexual violence. And because there was basically impunity in all these cases, and, for example, also murderers who were not convicted. And then the context was also related to different figures to also display the reality in our country. And we saw that the official figures showed basically that this was 15,500 cases reported, but the non-official figures showed, of course, were much higher, almost 10 times higher, almost 150,000 or on a daily, 150 per day, and many of them not being reported because a high percentage of them, of course, are happening in a family context, between parents and children, or a married couple, or even grandparents. And this trials or would never really lead to the perpetrators being convicted. So maybe only 8%, I would say, of sentences being convicted, and only less than that ending up in prison, which is, of course, a very low percentage.
At some point you say in your performance something like violador, like the rapist, are the police, the judge, the state, the president. And I would be interested, in order to also go further in our discussion and to see, okay, what do we actually demand also from the legal and state side? Well, how do you explain, because it is also the title of our discussion, El estado, opresor, and macho, violador, and it's a very strong statement. So maybe you could explain why you make this strong statement, because here we heard about domestic violence, and what we hear from you is more like police, state violence.
Bueno, el Estado como un ente.
The government has authority over the public and the citizens in on all levels and in all territories. So in all the different levels of state order. And what we see specifically, for example, in East, West, and all the different regions, is the abuse, the historical abuse, bodily abuse, in the case of women, when it comes to reproductional rights, or in the case of men, the mandatory military service. So then the bodies, the female bodies, and thinking of areas, for example, abortion is illegal in our country, and so all of that is happening in a patriarchal structure, and then also, of course, many weaknesses of the state being exposed. And we are really seeing in the protest movement at the moment, it's the patriarchy that imposes a model of life that is restricting us, and that makes us think that we are basically a collective that just doesn't want to live that way any longer and doesn't accept this way of living any longer. So we have seen in the last few weeks the protests increasing across Chile, and that way the reaction, the countermeasures by the police have increased as well. And that mechanism of violence and violence being taken and displayed in the street is, of course, violence against state violence against the citizens that had no arms and no weapons, and then so there is violence being perpetrated without any reason. And that's why we see, okay, these are the different phenomena arising from this patriarchal structure the restructuring of or how to reach out to those people who don't feel part of this, who also have to lead a life that they're unhappy with. So this is a bit the backdrop against which we developed our ideas. When we looked into the topics of rape, for example, in our context, what we saw was the role of the media, for example. There are, for example, cases that are being broadcast, and then all the figures that are being reported, the cases that lead to a verdict or to whatever. So any line of our performance wants to illustrate. For example, when we say the judges are rapists as well, then we want to basically say that many women are being kidnapped, raped, and then at the end of the day, nothing really happens. They're not being prosecuted because nobody really cares. Women, they're poor, second-class people, if you want. So when you take a look at the law. And then we're basically trying to focus, or we're always taking a look at the victims, and who are these people? What is their psychological profile? They're, for example, lower class, low skilled, no education. But on the other hand, then there is the perpetrator with their full names, and then being also portrayed as a more important person. And on the other hand, the victim and how they ended up in that type of context. So then there's also, for example, shedding a light on the role of the media. The media are also playing their part, and we also wanted to highlight that. What else? Then, yeah, the assaults, the attack, and the society that really allows for these phenomena to happen. People who would not report their friends or, yeah, this type of context.
Great. So I think we come to the center of the discussion. So if I understood you right, you mean by the hook in your song, on the one side, the concrete police state violence in the protests, but on the other side, the impunity of the juridical system as also being a violent phenomenon, right? And this is related to a patriarchal society that does not really want to look. Yes, to look closely. So this is the analysis. What would you, Christina, say to this analysis of LASTESIS?
Well, you know, what's surprising, or maybe not so surprising, is that it's the same all around the world. We've already spoken about this, but the phenomena are simply the same everywhere. When we speak about impunity, I did look it up again. There's a rather recent study by Mr. Christian Pfeiffer, a renowned criminologist here in Germany, and he reports, we have to add here that we don't have any official verdict statistics, but only police statistics. But he did his review, and he said only 1% of the violations being reported are being sentenced, because 85% don't even press charges or report to the police, and of the rest of them, only 7.5% are being sentenced. And that happens in Germany, so that's not only common practice elsewhere in the world, it's also a clear sign of impunity here in Germany. What is different is apparently that there is a strong movement in Chile that highlights femicides, stresses femicides, and that does not exist in Germany. There are some lower voices, if you like, who start speaking about this, but femicide as a term doesn't really exist. I know it's a criminal offense. You must not kill a woman in Germany either. But this phenomenon of femicides is not being recognized as such in Germany. And of course, it's about an unequal society. It's about the exercise of power, and one of the extremist forms of exercising power in a patriarchy is sexualized violence or gender-specific violence against women, but above all against women from vulnerable groups, trans women, women who are also attacked from a racist perspective. Women who are disabled. We know that disabled women much more often are victims of gender-specific violence, and that's part of the patriarchy. Right, maybe we can look at this question. Prasanna?
I thought this would happen. Can continue with other languages too. Yes. So Prasanna, do you have to add something to this? Because I think we have to try to understand what is that makes this violence so invisible, so not punished. And we now try to say, okay, it has to do with patriarchy. What about it makes it so? What about patriarchy makes it so legitimate to work with this violence?
Yeah. To add to Christina, it's I think the term femicide is not common in India too. Okay, and we don't see state perpetrated violence like in Chile. We don't see that. Addressing impunity, I think that's where the patriarchal norms come into play. Okay, where we have the laws, we take the laws to the women, but we also need to take the rule of law to the women. Okay, where the gap between the law and the implementation is huge. Okay, and that's where the role of patriarchy comes into place. And let me give you this example. We have all-women police stations in Tamil Nadu, the state I come from, a huge number, almost 130, 140 all-women police stations. And these stations were started way back in 1992, and were meant, the chief minister who started it thought that women will feel much more comfortable coming to women police. This station is manned fully by, it has fully women personnel, and they thought that it will be comfortable for her to come and talk and share what she's going through. Okay, but later, right now we find that even if it's a woman she's going and she's relating to, the policewoman places the woman in her first and the police later. Okay, so she says, I also get up in the morning at 4. So what is the complaint about him asking you to get up at 4? You're just married for 1 month and just 2 slaps? You know, there are much more that you need to face, and I'm also going through the same. So relating it to the own person, okay, so patriarchy, I think it doesn't mean it has to do with men, if I'm right, okay? Even women do exhibit ways of patriarchal culture. And we have the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, which came way back in 2005. Okay, and if we need a protection order, the woman can approach the magistrate. We have protection officers who will take her to the magistrate and get her the order. So that is the law. Now the state has said that she should have at least 5 counseling sessions before the protection order is given to her. And why do we ask for a protection order? Why does the victim ask for the protection order? Because her life is at risk. Okay, and imagine having 5 sessions before with him before going to the protection, before going to the court. Okay, and these all women police stations also, where it can be any woman who comes there with a domestic violence issue, and there will not be a case charge sheet registered. Okay, there will be a petition that is given, and the police officer talks to both the parties and then tries to negotiate. Okay, so that's the examples of impunity that that I would like to give. And there were the statistics said that there were about 34,000 rape cases in 2018. Okay, that is every 16 minutes there's a rape reported. Okay, and out of these 34,000, there were about 87,000 which were charge sheeted, and about 15 to 20% that were convicted. Okay, very, very similar, I feel, to what was shared of Germany. Okay. Yeah.
So yes, from what you were saying, one can start to understand that there is something systemic about this violence, that it has to do with media. Daphne, you were talking about it also. What is the representation also? With what can we relate the systemic dimension of violence to? You just maybe saw, I think one good example is that Polanski in France just got the César, the film award there, although he's has a lot of charges for being a rapist, and his films are also representing women in a very, very misogynist way, and still he gets in a way, the reassurance that public discourse finds him, yes, possible. It is possible. It is possible for him. And the actress who actually did the protest had to leave the space. Queer theorist Paul Preciado wrote about it last week in Libération, and he said that patriarchy is constituted by a necropolitical definition of male sovereignty, male superiority, that assure a strange legitimation of male violence to wife, children, and women. There is a legitimation. How can we explain this legitimation in your opinion? Maybe LASTESIS.
Claro, finalmente el problema que lo
Well, finally, we have to see that the problem that we're talking about, and maybe the reason why we went so viral, has to do with the patriarchy, also with the capitalist system that we have everywhere. And that is reflected in all the institutions. But not only there, it also has a cultural aspect. It's also a clear consequence of cultural aspects and how we live a culture. Of course, this is something that we want to change from the grassroots, and we don't just want to have a piecemeal approach, where we find a solution here and there. Of course, that is also part of our everyday fight, but really changing the cultural impunity. It's really interesting what happens to Polanski. So we are always asking ourselves, what happens in this culture? This culture really tries to cover up what is happening, and they try to muzzle people. Polanski, of course, is a famous person, and if you have this debate, you often hear that people say, well, you have to separate the director from his work of art. You have to separate the politician from his work. And we have to stop this because this leads to more impunity, not only at state or legal level, but also at cultural level. These people are rapists. And you can't just go on like this. Unfortunately, the patriarchy just fosters and promotes this impunity. there's a French author who speaks about the King Kong theory, and she says it's a pact of implicit silence that is being concluded because the perpetrator has never been as such. And it's really, really difficult to be successful in the first instance. And the victim often finds it very difficult to really recognize that her body was violated, to really express this term, to use the words. It's been a rape, you know, I've been raped. They find it extremely difficult. So with our performance, we've seen that many charges have been pressed. We call them funas in Chile, where cases that happened in the past are being highlighted, cases of violations of rape, where we know that they may not have been successful in a trial, that no charges have been pressed, that the victims are being victimized again. And these funas help us to really also take care of one another, of each other. And we had this huge number of different funas that were made public: harassment, micromachism, rapes, physical violence, and they really illustrate why this impunity exists. And often it's not people who are very distant from us. It does happen in our own microcosm, and these people continue defending each other, covering things up, defending people because they are renowned people because of what they've achieved in the world of work or what they've achieved as a film director. And this silence is also a form of violence.
Why? It would be interesting. Why do you think is there this silence?
Yo creo que también que tiene mucho que ver con una sociedad de la hipocresía, en donde la...
I think it has a lot to do with hypocrisy, where the state and the government and the police forces, but also famous people such as Polanski, are invisible in the conflicts with women, because it's always in the private scene, in the domestic scene, and there is no big weight on them, really, no pressure on them. It's just a huge or high level of hypocrisy, and everything that has to do with violence against women is made invisible. And in our specific case of LASTESIS, the fact is we have not become familiar, really, as of yet, in naming the injustice that exists, in really pointing our finger to what is happening, and in really illustrating that. And I think LASTESIS is trying to do that, and that is creating something very powerful, because we're pointing the finger at the perpetrator, at the one to blame. So we're trying to really shed a light on these dark areas that no one wants to stress. And of course, we also want to fight the fear that women are living in, being victims of physical violence, this constant fear that something bad is going to happen to you. And this is really what we want to highlight, that there is a high degree of injustice, and to really empower women at the same time. And there is also another part of this silence, which is the silence that was finally overcome by the fact that we are slowly realizing that it's not the victim whose fault it is, that it's not the victim who is to blame, but that there are other perpetrators, other actors, if you like. And this is also a silence that still exists, where the victim and the rapist don't assume that position. They don't accept that position. And that's very interesting because things are changing. How can you really have a verdict if the judge doesn't want one? But the social reality still exists. So what happens with the social dimension of such a verdict? I think this should aim at the fact that silence is not being perpetuated and that victims can overcome their traumas. So the question we could ask is, how can we make use of the social media as well? And that's not only a very recent thing. I mean, we had protests earlier on at universities in Chile where the silence was broken and there's no way back. So the social media does also play a role, and it's not the victim's fault. And also regarding the question why, we've been reading an Argentinian writer about this who states that all of the authorities and institutions are constantly trying to tell us that these are individual problems, family problems, that it's an individual case, a woman with a certain mental state, or a homosexual or gay person, and you just take away the political dimension of these offenses and crimes, because at the end of the day, it's the society that allows for this patriarchal system and that allows for these offenses and crimes to happen. It's not an individual problem. It's not something that is your personal fault, but it's a societal thing. And as soon as you understand this, you come up with terms such as femicide. And you have to ask yourselves, why are there persons who think they have the right over another person's body? To torture them, to rape them, to mutilate them, to murder them. It's not an individual topic. It's not a psychopath. It's not a mentally ill person. This means just taking away the social dimension. We are all part of this system of violation, of violence and oppression, women and men.
And from feminists in Germany to include rape and violence against women in the, for example, statistic of political motivated violence. Because for some reason, so in Germany there is a definition of political motivated violence based on your religion, based on your sexuality, based on where you come from, or your color. But women are not, like the violence against women is not included in that, interesting enough. And I think this is important to understand, that if these crimes are acted out because of sexism, because there's discrimination of women because of their gender, then we also need to understand them on a political level. And maybe this can also lead to my my next question. And today I have very basic questions that I think are still very difficult ones. For example, to understand why the violence in the first place. Mm-hmm. Why do men apparently feel themselves entitled to have such violent and destructive behavior? Is it because they're physically superior? Is it because their DNA is to hit other people? I mean, yes. What is it? Why do we have this violence? And I try to understand it in a systemic way and not only a personality way. I also brought a quote of Rita Segato, since you also refer to her, and she speaks about the relation of the way we understand masculinity and violence against women. And she says that masculinity is in a way constituted by violence, and that acts like rape are weapons in order to re-establish the gender order of male superiority. You said it also before, that this violence is a way of disciplination, a disciplinary act to re-establish a hierarchical gender relation. Maybe Christina, you want to comment on that, or maybe also try to answer the question, why this violence?
Ich glaube, es gibt da sehr grundsätzliche Fragen, die
I think there are really basic questions that we need to tackle. Of course, it's all about how we are being brought up in a patriarchal system, and there is, of course, this notion of masculinity on the one hand, then also this notion of how do women need to be, how do they need to behave, or people in general within our society. And to go back to your first question, men being identified as perpetrators, then we always hear the case that, okay, we need to draw the line, and that never is the case when it comes to female bodies. A female body always seems to be public. Every female politician needs to read in the paper whether she has, gained weight or whether she's a mother or not. And men are never being questioned along these lines. So I think we really need to take a closer look at the legislation from this angle. Reproductive health rights, for example. And in Germany, for example, when it comes to abortion and punishment, that is this clearly patriarchal legal system, and we need to start to tackle that. And man in our society, just to come back to that, gender-based violence or gender-specific violence, and women sitting together here, then we will all coincide. That's a male problem, but men don't talk about it. There are no panels where men come together, men being socialized as men, and they start to tackle this issue, saying this is our problem, we need to tackle that. And we probably need to sit and wait for a long time until this happens. Still, we need to open space, we need to create space in order to tackle this topic. There is a huge taboo connected to it, but even if these victims are being heard, they're being stigmatized at the same time to be victims. So they're always going to be the poor victim, always and forever, and there's hardly any means of escaping this circle. So on the one hand, either nobody believes these women when they report that they've been victim to violence, but if they do believe it, then they're being stigmatized being the victim. So that's why it's so important that we keep on talking about it at an early age, in school, for example, to talk about gender-specific violence, and not only talking about, okay, this is a man coming in and kidnapping somebody. No, this is an area, a sphere that's close to us, that we're exposed to, and that we have to be aware that this violence can occur at any time. And of course, violence does have a societal dimension, and also in conservative movements, in families, the state, right-wing extremists or right-wing movements, anti-feminism, the common denominator always being hate against women, women who break out of this conservative image that's attached to them. So we have to see that this is an important and integral part, and we as feminists, we need to stand up and need to fight against racism, and we need to stand next to each other and fight together in Germany and in some leftist movements. We don't really look at these cases of violence against women, and before we don't bring these two spheres together, we will not be able to come up with a solution. Thank you, Christina, for
against women. That we know that in Hanau as well as in Halle, the right-wing terrorists there had big parts of their manifestos and of the declarations where they referred to the bad feminists and the bad women. So there is also, yeah, in a way, this systemic dimension of patriarchy culminates in the right-wing ideology. So yes, so this subject is also a subject that we can do anti-fascism with, actually.
Wir müssen.
Yeah, we have to. We have to, yes. Prasanna, what would you comment?
Okay, why the violence?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to say the same thing they said, and it's basically conditioning in a patriarchal social environment where even if, I always say this, that even if a 2-year-old child trips and falls, they say that, why are you crying for this? There's so much more you need to face, and probably a big tsunami is going to hit you sometime. Okay. So while this is said every day to a woman, and when she grows up and she perhaps recognizes the violence, but she does not want to leave, it is normalized, okay? By what she reads in the media, probably what is said, the way awareness that she gets in, but still she feels, to be a good woman, I have to take care of my perpetrator husband, okay? And a case that comes to my mind, like we were waiting to rescue a woman from her house. So the kids came and she didn't come, and my social worker went up and said, what's happening to her? And she was ironing his clothes, okay? She said she was ironing his clothes and stacking them. And she said that he doesn't even know how to iron his clothes or what to wear every day to office. Okay, and that's the conditioning that happens, and whether it's of course, when most dominant among these patriarchal norms are entitlement over women's body or dominance and control, okay, and punishing women who do not conform to so-called duties or responsibilities. Okay, and I think exactly where this violence comes, and if we want to change, if we want to shift, it's about challenging these norms and practices, okay? And while we challenge these norms and practices that perpetrate violence against women, we need to create positive norms, okay? We need to create positive norms, and not just create them, but we need to mainstream them also. If you do not mainstream them, then you're again going to let negative norms take over.
You also have an explicit prevention program in your center.
Yeah.
So what would be for you methods of prevention?
Yeah. So we work with both young people, both men and women, and we feel that they have to unlearn what they have learned. Okay, just one workshop or one learning, that's not going to help in any way. Okay, by mainstreaming, I also mean every way: theater, media, what they learn in school. It has to be mainstreamed, in every way in society. Okay, and that's the only way I feel that they can unlearn what they have learned, and they will find support within themselves. Okay, find peer support, and that's the way forward.
LASTESIS, what do you say about the whys? You have a hook in your performance where you have, our punishment is the violence that you don't see. Patriarchy is a judge that condemns me from birth on. Yeah, the question was like, what is, you say, or the question was like, why do we have this violence? And the way you describe the violence is as a punishment that you don't see.
Sorry, que estaba hablando del castigo, de entender la violencia como castigo. Bueno, que también era analizando Rita Segato específicamente.
Yeah, Rita Segato has analyzed this phenomenon when she said the different dimensions of violence and bringing the female body into play. She's saying that violence is perpetuated like a punishment, a form of educating of a person who left the norm, to teach them, to educate them, and then also rape being an instrument of education, to educate that person and to put them in their rightful place. So from that viewpoint, the rapist perpetrating this sexual violence, exercising that, they don't perceive themselves of being a violent person, a rapist, but on the contrary, as like a moral educator complying with a new role, or taking on this role of educating and re-establishing a social order or the status quo. And I think this is, of course, very worrying, this perspective. And this goes back to an empirical study that Rita Segato carried out in prisons and in long conversations with rapists. And this is the conclusions that she drew, that they really thought, okay, they are these moralists and educators, and they needed to punish. They needed to punish because somebody committed an error and they did something wrong, and they need to be punished, and doing it by the means of sexual violence.
2012 rape that happened in Delhi, I think the world knows about it. And in a documentary that was produced a month or a couple of months later, exactly this is what the perpetrators said, okay, that they did not show any kind of remorse. The perpetrators who were interviewed in that rape, and no kind of remorse. They said that she should not have gone out at that point of time. And we men are losing our jobs because of these women. Okay, and that's the anger that they had shown in that young 23-year-old gang raped with brutal violence.
Ich glaube, auch das gibt es auch in Deutschland.
And I think that's also happening in Germany, blaming and in terms of guilt, always saying, yeah, the women have to blame themselves for that. That is almost, well, it's her own fault. I mean, she picked that husband, she chose him in the first place, and it's her own fault because of the way she dressed or the way she moved, because they didn't correspond to certain norms, and they have to be brought back to their senses, if you want. So then also these extended suicides, somebody first killing their wife and children and then killing themselves. This is also almost like protecting them. I'm taking them with me into the realm of death, which is, of course, complete nonsense, but on the other hand, justifying it, and also the punishment, and that being perpetuated in the verdict. When we say, okay, it's understandable or justifiable that a man kills a woman because she left him and ruined his future and ruined the family life, putting an end to this beautiful family life. So that always implies, it's not being spelled out explicitly, the perpetrators hardly say it, but it's always re-establishing the rules.
Reproductive behavior is regulated still, also through juridical means. And concerning what you were saying about the punishment, Silvia Federici in a Missy interview said something that really struck me when I understood, where she said that especially domestic violence is there in order to maintain the control over the unpaid labor of the woman. Because she says, a slave, so a worker that is not paid, you cannot discipline this worker by lowering the wage or by firing them. The only way you can discipline an unpaid worker, a slave, is by violence. And for me it was a revelation to understand what this violence is about, and why it is systemic, and why it has to do also with, yes, with this unpaid labor, this de-evaluation of women in these positions. So in order not to end with this black analysis, I would like maybe to use the rest of our time to talk about where we're at in the feminist movements, and what happened also in the last years, and what we want to put forward for the next years. So you from Chile, you have the absolute luxury to live in a continent where Ni Una Menos, where a whole movement against women, violence against women, started and is very strong. So my question is, how is your experience with this movement, and do you have the impression that there were steps forward because of these mobilizations?
¿Dónde estamos en el movimiento feminista hoy? ¿Hacia dónde queremos apuntar y cómo nos vinculamos? ¿Qué pensamos también de este contexto latinoamericano de muchos movimientos feministas hoy? Que por un lado dice como que bacán, pero igual.
Sí, bueno, es muy fuerte, como que ha crecido mucho el
Yes, it's strong. That feminist movement has really spread and grown in Chile, in Argentina, Mexico, across Latin America. But the figures are really shocking, because violence is systematic. It's an everyday phenomenon. It's happening out there in the streets. It's terrible. It's like a fear that's with you all the time. There's these two sides of the medal, of course. On the one hand, it's huge. We have achieved a lot. And on the other hand, it's of course the reaction, the answer to something terrible that's going on out there. And then what's really great is that we are united. It's a collective effort, a collective mission, and always pointing towards the common good, to help the women to take to the streets. The girls, adolescent girls, can go to school, to university, without being afraid to be sexually harassed or assaulted. And so what we always say is there is a system that we are talking about, patriarchy connected to the neoliberal system, to capitalism, and has exploited our country, has exploited the situation out there in the streets, and that we cannot turn back anymore. So we meet, we take to the streets, we meet, we accompany, or we stand with the girls, our friends in Argentina, for example. Millions of people taking to the streets, exercising their rights. And solidarity between the countries, so we really felt it. So we are in touch, we write to each other, we spread the message in all the spheres up until Mexico, and so the movement is growing. And hopefully patriarchy will topple at some point. Soon, any moment soon, probably.
Ah, sí.
La ley Gabriela.
La ley Gabriela. Es que, claro, estaba...
The law Gabriela, there is this category of femicide, which is, of course, if a husband kills the wife when they're married, but not in an unmarried couple, that would not really take effect. So the feminist movement has now pushed for this case of the ley Gabriela like a public law, so for a murder in an unmarried couple also to qualify as femicide. And I think that took effect only 2 weeks ago, only a few days ago, before International Women's Day, immediately before that. So it was on the 7th of March. But there was this public discourse, and the new law being presented. So it's not only to put the man or being the man being the perpetrators and the women being abused. So it was a huge conflict. But on the other hand, the wording was very unfortunate, and it needed to be rephrased, and then it was really became public on the 8th of March. And I think many millions of people taken to the streets, and that was really, really impressive. And the law Gabriela and gender-based violence goes beyond different forms of relationships or married couples, unmarried couples, and it's just also telling us that we need to fight for our basic rights, the right to abortion, for example, or certain other public spheres. So this public fight in Latin America is really showing effect. So on the one hand, starting in a micro sphere, but taking it to the macro level, violence perpetrated by the state against the women, against dissidents, and then also we need to change our awareness. We need to dig deeper, and everybody needs to feel invited to participate in this fight and to work towards this end, to topple patriarchy.
What do you say? Do you have comparable developments in India, at least?
Yeah, I think the wave of feminism is very much what's happening around the world, I guess. We're still combating inequalities, social inequalities, cultural and political inequalities. And I think more young activists are coming on the streets demanding justice, and also using the social media to speak about it and challenging social patriarchal norms, which I think is a very good sign. And the government embracing that also, and we're coming up with, of course, we have progressive changes in the law that happened in the last, I think, after the 2012 incident. We have the Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act, and we have the Criminal Amendment Act, which recognized criminalized acid violence and redefined rape, and also criminalized stalking and so on. And they also now looking at other forms of crime like cyber violence. I think violence against women has taken a very different turn all over the world. Okay, where the perpetrator, that's why I think it's nice to address this more not like a national issue, but like a global issue. Mm-hmm. Okay, because perpetrators are going to be anywhere. Okay, they might be a victim in some part of the world, and a perpetrator can be in the US or anywhere. Okay, so I think if we look at it as a global issue, and we will probably find better solutions, and I think amplifying these voices, amplifying these protests, giving them support and standing by them is what is going to bring a different world, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, and maybe to the guest who created the occasion for this discussion, Christina, you have the last word about, maybe you want to comment on the achievements in Chile, and maybe you want to say what you want as a lawyer and activist in this field to happen in Germany.
Ich denke, es gibt verschiedene.
Well, I think there are indeed different levels. What we need is clear support for the victims, for those affected. It's unbelievable, really, that in a rich country such as Germany, we don't have enough women's shelters, that women's counseling offices are not well equipped. They don't have the staff to really protect women. So the escape of violence is not a safe escape in Germany. And that's really something which leads to an outcry, really. And then after having been in a women's shelter, how can women be reintegrated into social life? How can they be economically independent outside of that violent relationship? How can they lead a self-determined life? And that leads to the bigger question of how can we bring about equality. This is something that we can call for regarding the institutions, but that's certainly not enough. What I would like to see is a strong feminist movement in Europe with a great spirit of solidarity with the other movements elsewhere in the world, and that also makes the link to anti-racism and takes that to the street. We're not going to change this within the system. What we need is a big social change in order to bring about to take steps forward. And we've become somewhat comfortable with our situation, and there is a certain degree of apathy here in Germany. We're more concerned with doing something against racist and right-wing extremist movements instead of really becoming active. And we want to see the last days of the patriarchy here in Germany as well.
I think we saw in this discussion how similar this all is. As you say, we have here in Europe this image that we are the avant-garde of liberal rights, etc. And we saw, like, even in Latin America, we have the term femicide. We can really talk about something that we want to fight, and in Germany it's not yet established juridically, and I like this, that we kind of, yes, step down from our big horse, European horse. Yes, and by being aware how similar it is, then we understand also it is systemic and not specific. And this systemic silence also has to be broken. And I think has to be broken, as you said, in order to shake this historically evolved gender relation where male superiority is considered as natural and normal. Yes, I think with that I can thank you for talking. We will now have a small pause where the stage will be changed in order for the performance of LASTESIS to take place. Thank you for now.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching in the live stream. And wait a bit and you will see a performance at your computers. The performance is 15 minutes.
sorprendió a todos con palabras que demostraban una profundidad y una madurez, cuando dijo que a pesar del dolor que el hombre que la violó le había causado, ella iba a querer y cuidar a su guagüita.
Las tesis. Las tesis. Las tesis. Las tesis.
El patriarcado es un juez que nos juzga por nacer, y nuestro castigo es la violencia que no ves.
Entendemos la violación como cualquier forma de sexo forzado impuesto por un individuo con poder de intimidación sobre otro. Por otro lado, el Código Penal chileno enfatiza en el acceso carnal al cuerpo.
El año pasado se reportaron 15.533 casos de violación u otros delitos sexuales. Sin embargo, organismos no gubernamentales indican que en Chile las cifras son mayores, las cifras reales, y que se producen cerca de 150 agresiones sexuales diarias. Cada 25 minutos ocurre una violación.
El 90% de las agredidas fueron mujeres, el 98% de los agresores fueron hombres, y de todos los casos sexuales denunciados, solo un 8% de las causas terminó en condena. Desde el levantamiento popular en Chile del 18 de octubre se han registrado 208 causas por violencia política sexual. Y la culpa no era mía.
Camila, 7 años.
Ni dónde estaba.
En la casa de mi abuelo.
Ni cómo vestía.
Ropa infantil.
Y la culpa no era mía.
Fernanda, 12 años.
Ni dónde estaba.
Camino a mi casa.
Ni cómo vestía.
Uniforme de colegio.
Y la culpa no era mía.
Margarita, 28 años.
Ni dónde estaba.
En una fiesta.
Ni cómo vestía.
Minifalda y polera.
Y la culpa no era mía.
Raquel, 42 años.
Ni dónde estaba.
En el trabajo.
Ni cómo vestía.
Uniforme de enfermera. El violador eras tú. El violador eres tú. Mi compañero de clase, tu papá, mi amigo, tu hermano, el vecino, mi pololo o mi tío, los pacos, los jueces, el Estado, el presidente. El Estado opresor es un macho violador. El Estado opresor es un macho violador. El violador eres tú. El violador eres tú. Se puede entender la violación de dos formas. Primero, como castigo o venganza contra una mujer genérica que salió de su lugar de subordinación. La violación opera como un acto disciplinador y vengador por parte de un hombre que cumple la función de moralizador y que busca restablecer el orden de género. También se puede entender como demostración de fuerza y virilidad ante una comunidad de pares. El violador no viola porque tiene el poder o para demostrar que lo tiene, sino porque debe obtenerlo a través de la violación. Esto es el mandato de violación.
Es una exhibición de la sexualidad como capacidad viril y violenta, y no como búsqueda de placer sexual. Creer que el violador viola para satisfacer un deseo sexual o porque tiene problemas psicológicos es disfrazar la dimensión política de la violación. Es ocultar el carácter de estos actos
como una expresión de poder o de dominio masculino.
La violación es un problema social. Es la sociedad la que permite al hombre perpetuar la violación. Y la culpa no era mía.
Catalina, 35 años.
Ni dónde estaba.
En mi casa.
Ni cómo vestía.
Pijama.
Y la culpa no era mía.
Patricia, 16 años.
Ni dónde estaba.
En un campamento.
Ni cómo vestía.
Jardinera.
Y la culpa no era mía.
Andrea, 57 años.
Ni dónde estaba.
En la micro.
Ni cómo vestía.
Pantalón y camisa.
Y la culpa no era mía.
Victoria, 21 años.
Ni dónde estaba.
En el cumpleaños de mi tío.
Ni cómo vestía.
Falda y chaleco. Pablo Neruda.
Una mañana, decidido a todo, la tomé fuertemente de la muñeca y la miré cara a cara. No había idioma alguno en que pudiera hablarle. Se dejó conducir por mí sin una sonrisa y pronto estuvo desnuda sobre mi cama. Su delgadísima cintura, sus plenas caderas, las desbordantes copas de sus senos, la hacían igual a las milenarias esculturas del sur de la India. El encuentro fue el de un hombre con una estatua. Permaneció todo el tiempo con sus ojos abiertos, impasible. Hacía bien en despreciarme. No se repitió la experiencia.
Una mañana,
decidido a todo, la tomé fuertemente de la muñeca y la miré cara a cara. No había idioma alguno en que pudiera hablarle. Se dejó conducir por mí sin una sonrisa y pronto estuvo desnuda sobre mi cama. Su delgadísima cintura, sus plenas caderas, las desbordantes copas de sus senos, la hacían igual a las milenarias esculturas del sur de la India. El encuentro fue el de un hombre con una estatua. Permaneció todo el tiempo con los ojos abiertos, impasible. Hacía bien en despreciarme. No se repitió la experiencia.
¿No se repitió la experiencia?
El acceso sexual al cuerpo de la mujer sin su consentimiento es un hecho sobre el cual todas las sociedades tienen o tuvieron noticia.
El agresor no le llama violación. El violador no viola. Él estaba borracho, sus amigos lo conocen, él nunca haría algo así. Ella estaba loca. Ella no me dijo que no. Ella me miró toda la noche. Ella me sonrió.
Y la agredida muchas veces tampoco le llama violación. Ella guarda silencio, por miedo o por vergüenza.
De esta forma, la violación ha esquivado su nombre a lo largo de esta guerra milenaria que han inscrito sobre nuestros cuerpos.
Un pacto de silencio que hoy arde cada vez que mujeres y disidencias alzamos la voz.